I got back from Augusta today, and what a process that was. I commend anyone who was able to come out today, and there had to be over 1,000 of us, and mad props to those who toughed out the entire thing, including the committee. I personally sat in the committee room for 7 hours before I was able to get my 3 minutes in, and I'd signed up days in advance. But after sitting in that room, I heard a lot of testimony from both sides, and there were two main points the opposition seemed to be making after we destroyed their statistics, that women were constantly sexually harassed and that this is the will of the people. I can't speak to the sexual harassment thing that much. I have been harassed before, but the few and far times I've experienced it, I've been able to cease it with a few words to the patron or the manager. And I also see that as a problem with the guest. Do you think those types of people are going to stop harassing you just because you're making more in direct wages? And for those of you that said something about the places you work and that you deal with it daily, you should really say something to your managers or owners if it continues to go on a daily basis as you claim, because that's obviously not something that anybody should have to deal with. But there wasn't a debate or time to refute every point, but the will of the people thing kept getting repeated, and you'd see our side resoundingly shaking our head no. So I'm going to explain it here in case anyone's unclear why our side has trouble understanding that logic. So let me read the drawn-out ballot question verbatim because it's relevant. Do you want to increase the minimum hourly wage of $7.50 to $9 in 2017 with annual $1 increases up to $12 in 2020 and annual cost of living increases thereafter? And do you want to raise the direct wage for service workers who receive tips from half the minimum wage to $5 in 2017 with annual $1 increases until it reaches the adjusted minimum wage? So, the phrase tip credit is never mentioned in there. People in general support minimum wage increases. Bernie was fighting for 15, so a raise to 12 seems naturally agreeable to most. There's a very good chance several people were voting to raise the standard minimum wage, not repeal the tip credit. This passed 55 to 45, so even if as little as 5% of voters were only voting to increase the standard minimum wage or didn't know what the tip credit was, then it would have been split 50-50. You'll notice there's three separate issues in that one question: raising the wage to 12, raising the server wage to 12, and adjusting the minimum wage for cost of living. The latter two are smaller but still very significant issues that are all rolled into the generally agreeable first, larger issue. A legislator voiced today that perhaps it should have been three separate questions, and I couldn't have agreed more. I've spoken to hundreds of people now about this, and I'd say about 75% of them either had no idea what the tip credit was or how it impacts restaurant operations or that it's being repealed. The opposition claims everyone they've talked to knows exactly what it was and what they were voting for, so obviously one of us is incorrect. Fortunately, there's an easy way to test this. If you just go walk around, ask people if they've heard of the tip credit, ask your family, ask your friends, ask strangers. Can they tell you under the former law how much of a credit an employer was allowed to take? Do they know how much has gone away since question 4? Do they understand why it exists or how it impacts a company and how it's incorporated into a business plan? It's not popular to say, but most people in the general public don't know everything. They're ignorant of laws, myself included. I don't know the laws regarding where revenue is supposed to go from harness racing, gambling. I don't know the law that says how long a limited liability partnership's name's protected after their LLC is revoked. There's hundreds of laws that most people are unfamiliar with. So to say that 100% of Mainers knew about this one and they knew exactly that they were repealing the tip credit is inaccurate, if not blatantly untrue. The entire reason we have a representative government is to so they can study laws based on research and testimony from experts, and they can both introduce and adjust the necessary laws to better our economy and the standard of living for our people. A citizens' referendum bypasses this process entirely, and they're allowed to ignore the expert testimony from the Restaurant Association, the Bankers Association, retailers, innkeepers, all the professional associations that are essential, and the ones that forecast Maine's economy outlook for the next few years spoke out against this, but that just got ignored. It's especially ironic, the ones who supported the Bill LD 1117, I'm not familiar with it, but it seemed to say more or less, wait 2 years and see what happens. So that pretty much seems to confirm that the will of the voters, they're not too sure about this. They want to sit back and see if restaurants do exactly as they're predicting. So if that happens, then what? Can the legislator overturn it then? Or do they have to raise millions of dollars and go collect tens of thousands of signatures and make sure this is another citizens' initiative to overwrite the will of the people? If the legislator can do it, then what's the time frame in which that's allowed? What if after 1 year, half the restaurants close in Maine? Can they override it then, or do we need to have a separate hearing about this? It just doesn't make entirely a lot of sense to me. But there's an entirely different argument as to whether or not we should even have citizen referendums in the first place. I don't want to get into that. That's a whole nother debate. But one side of that is that they can be easily manipulated with financing. The proponents of question 4 raised $2.3 million to put this question on the ballot and get support around our state. Where did the money come from? Glad you asked. That's an excellent question. The vast majority of it was anonymously funded through politically active nonprofits with agreeable enough sounding names like Mainers for Fair Wages and Maine People's Alliance. But, I mean, I can't speak to the former, but my own dealings with the latter the past few months, the Maine People's Alliance has shown me they are anything but. I may do a separate video about them entirely, but the Maine People's Alliance paid their people $200,000 out of the raised money to go collect signatures, use ridiculous propaganda, whatever crazy tactics they have, to get this passed, to talk to the right people, to phrase this just right, to get all this rolled into one. It was difficult for restaurants to raise money because you couldn't speak out against this without simultaneously speaking out against the standard minimum wage, which was a surefire way to get customers alienated and bad press. The results ended up in our side spending $132,000 on it versus $2 million from the other side. I mean, if you took 10 times our funding and added $500,000, you still wouldn't reach their levels of out-of-state funding. I've never been into politics before, and admittedly, my knowledge on this is weak, but a cursory assessment of this just looks like a perfect example of money-buying politics. On one side, you have paid lobbyists with no intimate knowledge of our business or industry, and then on the other, you have an overwhelming majority of the lifelong workers, the owners, the experts of several industries telling you that, yes, we do need a tip credit. It's actually quite important. I'm getting off track, but what I want you to take from this is two things. Number one, this wasn't the will of the voters. Many people had no clue about the tip credit. You can find this out for yourself. Go ask people. And number two, the voters can be wrong. It was so ironic to see the opposition. Some people would go up and crap on LePage for one thing or another, and then go on to say you need to respect the will of the people. You realize the people elected LePage. So which is it? You need to either respect that or accept the fact that the voters might be wrong sometimes. So I implore everyone to just go talk with others about this issue. Get educated. Find out for yourselves how many people knew about the tip credit before question 4. Go to your favorite restaurant. Ask them. Ask the servers. Ask the owner. Go to your favorite local place. See what they think about it. Draw your own conclusions about how this will impact people, and then let your representative know. But thanks for listening.